Detroit Lions training camp is right around the corner. In a couple of days, the Detroit Lions will show up to training camp and fight for roster spots, fight for playing time, and fight for the right to be impactful on the Detroit Lions roster. And with that being the case, with all of these camp battles and all of these fights for positional playing time, there are going to be players that don't get as much time as they deserve. And there are going to be players that are released that don't deserve to be cut from this roster. But whether it be due to competition, whether it be due to roster construction or a number of other factors, some players will not make the roster that absolutely deserve to do so. And today we are going to take a look at a couple of those players, guys that you would expect to make the roster, guys that in a vacuum, if you were to ask about them, you'd say, yeah, they're going to be Detroit Lions in 2024. But looking at their positional battles, looking at all the other guys fighting for their playing time and their roster spot, they might not be the shoo-in that a lot of fans expect them to be. Now, starting off today, we're going to take a look at the offensive line, and particularly at veteran Dan Skipper. Now, Dan Skipper has spent 6 seasons with the Detroit Lions. He's played 37 games and made 6 starts for Detroit, and over the last couple of years, his role has actually been expanding on the Detroit Lions. In 2022, he played 387 snaps, and in 2023, he played 101 snaps for the Detroit Lions. He made 1 start a season ago and 5 starts in 2022, and he's been a really strong veteran leader for the Detroit Lions over the last 5 to 6 seasons as a depth piece. Now, Dan Skipper stands at 6'9", 317 pounds. In 2023, he played 101 snaps for the Detroit Lions with 1 penalty and 0 sacks, and overall, I thought was a very productive and very strong member of the Detroit Lions offensive line. While he was very rarely asked to play either the right or the left tackle position, there were quite a few opportunities that he was brought in to be the 6th offensive lineman. He was brought in to be a decoy at tight end. He was brought in to, give a little bit of a boost to the rushing attack of the Detroit Lions. And I thought he played that role very, very well. For a guy that's 6'9", 317 pounds, he moves pretty well. He's a really strong run blocker, and he was really impactful in a positive way. In 2022, he played 387 snaps, 1 penalty, and 4 sacks allowed. Not necessarily starting quality tackle play, but again, if you're a guy that needs to be called on and needs to be relied upon, Dan Skipper is a player that the Lions clearly trust to do that. And he's a guy that has had the opportunity and the experience to start on the Detroit Lions and be impactful. So why do I think that he is a surprise roster cut? Why do I think that this 6-year NFL veteran, this 6-year Detroit Lion, is a guy that will not make the roster this time around on his 7th opportunity to do so? Well, I think truly that the offensive line depth that the Detroit Lions have is just much better than it has been in the last couple of years, right? You have Coyote Owaska, a player that has started in the NFC Championship game for you and in more snaps last year, allowed less sacks and less penalties than Dan Skipper. Granted, he was playing a different position, but still the depth and the quality is there that you would want to keep Coyote Owasika around. Colby Sorsdale, a 5th-round selection from 2 drafts ago, has experience at right tackle, was really good a season ago, again, playing over 250 snaps, 1 penalty, 1 sack, a player that has the experience playing right tackle and in a pinch absolutely could, and I think could be just as impactful in the run game and a better pass protector on the boundary as opposed to Dan Skipper. On top of that, he's younger as well as maybe being a little bit cheaper on that 5th-round rookie contract. Giovanni Manu, the most recent 4th-round selection of the Detroit Lions, stands at 6'7", 354 pounds. The mountainous offensive tackle is, I think, the easy one-to-one comparison to move away from Dan Skipper, right? He's younger, he's more athletic, he's not necessarily bigger, but he is heavier, he's a better run blocker, I think he moves a bit better, he's a better athlete, and overall, he does a lot of things that you would like to have on the roster over Dan Skipper. Christian Mahogany, the 6th-round selection, a player that the Lions will almost certainly keep around, is a guy from Boston College who was really good, was great at the guard position, allowed very few sacks, very few pressures on a lot of pass protecting snaps, and then you have the other interior guys like Kingsley Eguakun or Duke Clemens, guys that at the center position are probably going to get the nod because of the lack of depth there. And while Graham Glasgow could play center, they probably want a longer term option And considering they paid both of these guys a signing bonus as undrafted rookie free agents, there's a good chance that at least one of them sticks on the active roster, if not both of them being on the practice squad. So I think all of those guys will stick around. All of those guys either have major starting experience, if not better and more quality starting experience than Dan Skipper. And if not, they're rookie players with high upside and players that the Detroit Lions just signed to their rookie contracts. Taking a look a little bit more in depth at the tackle position in particular, Giovanni Manu, as we talked about, 6'7", 354 pounds, 23 years old, better athlete, higher ceiling, cheaper contract. He is a player that will be sticking around for a very, very long time. And then Colby Sorsdale. Played right tackle in college, played a little bit of right tackle in the NFL, 6'6", 315, so you're giving up a few inches, but the weight is still the same. He's a great run blocker, 2 penalties and 1 sack on 253 snaps. He is a great player, a great young player, and a great cheap player for the Detroit Lions. And I do think that with the versatility along the offensive line with Manu and Sorsdale, that Dan Skipper just might not be a player that sticks around. And he's a guy that just isn't within the plans of the Detroit Lions anymore. An older offensive tackle, certainly a veteran offensive tackle, but a guy that has never really showed the ability to develop into a starter, a guy that as a sixth offensive lineman is very serviceable, but nothing that Giovanni Manu can't do, nothing that Colby Sorsdale can't do, nothing that, even Mahogany or Owasaka can't do. So with that being said, despite him being a 6-year veteran in Detroit, I think there's a good chance that Dan Skipper is released and is not brought back to be on the Detroit Lions. He might be put on the practice squad, but at the end of the day, I don't see a spot for him on the active roster. And then we move on to a very similar situation on the defensive side of the ball with John Kaminsky, a 29-year-old defensive end for the Detroit Lions, played 2 seasons in Detroit, totaling 30 games, 19 starts, and on each year playing well over 50% of snaps with the Detroit Lions defense. Now, in his 2 seasons in Detroit, John Kaminsky's put up 66 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 20 quarterback hits, 6 sacks, 4 passes defended, and a fumble recovery. And while he has been really solid for the Detroit Lions defense, it's been a Detroit Lions defense that has been lacking significant depth, right? It's an offensive and defensive line that really hasn't had a lot of playmakers on it. And while John Kaminsky has shown up and he's played really well in his opportunities, you still wouldn't look at either of John Kaminsky's 2 seasons and say, okay, that's a guy we build around. That's a guy that we need to have on the roster and a guy that is irreplaceable on the defensive line. And considering that 2023 was a big regression for John Kaminsky, there's a good opportunity that he will, if not already has, been replaced in the minds of the Detroit Lions coaching staff. In 2023, John Kaminsky saw less sacks, less tackles for loss, less quarterback hits, less passes defended, and less snaps played, despite playing in more games and making more starts. So while John Kaminsky was technically on the field for more games, he played less snaps, had less efficiency at every single metric at the defensive line position, and last year only walked away with, I think, 5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, which for a guy playing nearly 60% of defensive snaps really isn't that impressive considering the other depth and the other talent that the Detroit Lions now have on their roster. Now, taking a look at the Detroit Lions depth, obviously at the edge rusher position, you have Aiden Hutchinson and Marcus Davenport, who are likely starters. You have Josh Paschal, a third-year player from Kentucky, who has shown a lot of flashes and a lot of potential. You have James Houston, the pass rushing specialist. You have Matthew Betts, the CFL Defensive Player of the Year, as well as Nate Lynn, a undrafted rookie free agent who's been playing really well in OTAs, really well throughout minicamp, and has been making flashes of his own. And then if you want to make the comparison that, hey, John Kaminsky plays inside and outside, the interior defensive line is just as good and just as deep with Aleem McNeil, DJ Reader, Levi Onwuzurike, who seems to have a really good minicamp so far, Broderick Martin, the second-year player with a lot of upside, Mekhi Wingo, the 6th-round selection and pass rush specialist on the interior, as well as Kyle Pico, the 6-year NFL veteran from Tennessee, who has played a lot more snaps on the defensive tackle, as well as having a little bit more size and run-stopping ability. Now, when you take a look at John Kaminsky as a role player on this defense, there's a ton of competition for his spot. His role really has been filled by the Detroit Lions, and there's just a ton of depth at each position. right? You take a look as a run defender. I think Aiden Hutchinson's a better run defender. I think Marcus Davenport is a better run defender. I think Josh Paschal is a better run defender. And I think that, of course, the interior guys like DJ Reader and Aleem McNeil are right up there as well. Take a look at pass rushing ability. Aiden Hutchinson is better. Marcus Davenport is better. James Houston is better. Matthew Betts is better. I think Nate Lynn is a more explosive pass rusher than John Kaminsky. And when you take a look at the versatility aspect of, a guy that can play inside and outside, Josh Paschal does that just as well, if not better. Aiden Hutchinson has been kicked inside a couple of times for pass rushing and run stopping situations. You have guys like Aleem McNeil, who I think are athletic enough to even be put on the outside and play at edge a little bit if you need on a run defending play. And there are just so many players that can do what John Kaminsky does that I don't think you can look at this roster. I don't think you can look at John Kaminsky as a player and say, one thing that he does better than anybody else. There's not a standout trait that John Kaminsky has that other players don't already kind of take up that role for. So with that being said, I don't know if John Kaminsky does make the roster. Again, in a vacuum, if you were to ask me just plain and simple, does John Kaminsky have a spot? I would probably say yes. But when comparing him as a pass rusher, he is at best the 4th to 5th best option there. When taking a look as a run defender, he is at best the 3rd or 4th best option at that position. When you take a look at versatility, there are other guys that can play interior and exterior. And just overall, there isn't a massive role for John Kaminsky. And while I do think what he's done over the last 2 years has been impactful and incredible for the Detroit Lions, especially in 2022, I thought he was super underrated. At this point in the offseason, with the addition of Betts and Lynn and a lot of other players like Davenport into this pass rush, the depth and the talent is just significantly better. And I'm just not sure that there is still a roster spot for John Kaminsky. Now, much like Malcolm Rodriguez, there's a chance that John Kaminsky gets traded or potentially gets waived and gets picked up as a priority waiver wire guy. But at the end of the day, there's just a lot of competition on this defensive line, and I'm not sure that John Kaminsky stands out anywhere that would warrant him being a major keep for the Detroit Lions defense. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Those are my two major surprises. I think that both John Kaminsky and Dan Skipper could be on the chopping block this summer, and I wouldn't be surprised that if by 2024's week 1, we don't see either of them on the active roster for Detroit. And as much as it would hurt, I think it is the unfortunate reality. So with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about these roster cuts. Do you think Skipper and Kaminsky are on the outs? Do you think they're safe? I'd be very curious what you guys have to say about these two players. But with all of that being said, thank you all so very much for watching. If you have yet to subscribe yet, please go down below and do so. We are shooting for 4,100 subscribers by the time the veterans get to training camp. So if you could go down below and subscribe to the channel, if you have yet to do so, please go down below and do so. It helps the channel out a ton, helps me out a ton, and it hit the bell notification so you never miss a Detroit Lions upload. With all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.